TV, but we have a couple British guys, but they're anti-New World Order folks. They're evil too, Tarpley.
We have this guy Piers Morgan today, Piers Morgan on CNN, who's saying, wasn't this a great day for the monarchy? Hasn't the monarchy bounced back from all those troubles with Diana?
No, you're seeing the power of this house.
When you look at Al Jazeera, this is a complete British channel, right? They're all the experts.
Sir David Frost?
All of them British intelligence experts from Oxford or Cambridge or Exeter or Reading or all these other universities. What you're creating for the American people is this idea that Americans don't know anything about the world. You have to get a British expert to come and tell you about the world, and that's going to be Amanpour or Piers Morgan or other voices that are now really literally everywhere. There's a tremendous proliferation of this in the news business, and I think that's a really ominous tendency, because it used to be that an American reporter might have a different view, more egalitarian, less sympathetic to colonialism, less sympathetic to imperialism.
No, on average, British reporters are very lapdog to police, state, and authority, anti-gun, knock-kneed, groveling at the feet of power.
Something like this. And anyway, their worldview, since Britain, unfortunately, right now,
it's an imperial conditioned group. The West is dying just like Japan. And sorry, go ahead.
The social mobility, in other words, your chances, if you're born in the bottom 20% economically, your chances of getting to the top 5% right now in the United States are worse than any country in continental Europe. But the British society is even more hierarchical, more stratified, and with less mobility that we have.
And they're the king of cronyism.
So Britain is a completely oligarchical, hierarchical society.
And it's being held up as the model of everything, though it is 1984 control. We'll be back with the birth certificate. Stay with us. Bunch of inbred scum. And they sell the British people that you are British because of this house. This is your identity. Is these people that have been sucking off the British people for hundreds and hundreds of years, using their blood for empires, waging war against free societies. It's unbelievable. And in closing, I'll say this about the monarchy. We've spent a lot of time on it because it's an illustration of how they sell things, how they sell the greatest thing on earth is a football game. The greatest thing on earth is watching the prince and some woman getting married. The greatest thing on earth is loving this establishment. That's your identity. And it just goes to show they can hype up the threat of terror. Better chance of being killed by a honeybee, but got to give all your rights up because of the terrorist. It shows how this stuff, upon inspection, is unbelievably, ridiculously over the top, in a satirical way, hollow. Now, Webster Griffin Tarpley, you have one final comment on that?
Yeah, look, I also want to point out the beef against the monarchy, actually, that I try to represent anyway, is a strain of thought within England, within Britain. My grandfather was from Wakefield. He was a bricklayer, skilled worker. My grandmother was from Leeds. Okay, so this is the north of England. This is Yorkshire. And in Yorkshire, there is a tradition, which is you don't like the court, you don't like Buckingham Palace, you don't like the City of London, you don't like the Foreign Office. You're suspicious of this entire imperial complex.
Well, that's Robin Hood.
This is, well, it's the north of England. That's a little bit further south, right? Nottingham.
But that's going on there, too.
This is a strain of thought inside Britain. So it's not that I'm saying British are bad. I'm saying this is a view that is also well represented inside England itself.
No, I mean, they always turn it around like you don't like social, government-run healthcare, you're a racist. You're questioning these birth certificates, you're a racist. Same thing. Oh, you don't like Chinese Communist Party? You don't like Asians. Oh, you don't like the corrupt British Empire. You hate British people. And as you said, Tarpley is Britannic, or it's really all German to begin with. Yeah.
Sure. Anyway, it's a well-established tradition that the north of England, right, the Yorkshire school, is extremely hostile, skeptical against a lot of these manifestations. And I hope there are still some people who keep that going, as I tried to. But to have that come here in the United States, this is now...
Well, it's totally alien to our 1776 spirit. Right.
Again, if from the point of view of an American system traditionalist, there is nothing more revolting than the U.S. television coverage of this event, right? Fawning, gaga, idiots.
Well, it's the force feeding this joke.
Right.
It's like inviting people to a great Sunday dinner and your friends arrive and you're serving rotten possum. And they're holding up a rotten possum crawling with maggots, and they're saying, "Isn't it delicious?" as the maggots are falling on your plate. You're like, "No, it stinks. I need to throw." They're like, "Oh, it's delicious. Look, we have all these idiots gobbling it." I mean, it's like the emperor's new clothes.
Thank you for this very graphic metaphor. I'm sure the British monarchy will never recover.
Well, I mean, here are these crazed-eyed, evil, drunken people with dozens of mistresses launching all these wars, writing books about how they want a world government to carry out forced extermination. And financing I mean, they are the group that funded the social Darwinistic movement, the eugenics. It always goes back to this.
Yeah, look.
And you got the Rothschild banking cartel marrying in with them, absolutely pushing it as well.
Right, look.
In fact, how do the Rothschilds mix into this?
Well, the Rothschilds are one of the banking houses. I mean, if you go back to King Edward VII, he had a group of bankers around him, and the significant number were also Jewish bankers.
Lord Rothschild.
One of the things that Edward VII said to the Jewish banking community in London is, if you want to be admitted into society, Edward VII's problem was he didn't have any money, and he wanted to live on a vast scale. So he said to these bankers, if I give you my investments, his investments were not a lot, I want all the profits to belong to me. I expect you to deliver profits.
Because he had political power. Mommy had all the money.
And she was a recluse. So
because he was he was the real king.
He was the Prince of Wales, and he was really the king, out of Marlborough House in that case. So he said to them, if there are profits, I get the profits, and you jack up the profits. If there are losses, you eat the losses. And this is Sir Ernest Cassel. Rothschild is another example, although they had established themselves somewhat earlier. They got into the...
By double financing both sides of the Napoleonic Wars.
Right. And, of course, August Belmont, the guy who ran the Democratic Party from 1850 to, 1870, 1880, the whole New York establishment dominated by August Belmont. August Belmont was officially the Rothschild agent in North America.
How did Milner tie into this?
Yeah, Milner is a kind of a think tank, right?
He's their futurist schemer.
The kindergarten, so-called. This is under Edward VII, and here's the problem that they have.
That's why I brought up Milner.
In 1899, you have the Boer War. And what the Boer War shows, first of all, is that the British are militarily very weak, because the Afrikaners in Orange Free State and Transvaal defeat the British imperial forces.
And those are wild Dutch.
Yeah, they then essentially reveal the weakness of the British. And at that point, Russia, under Count Witte, proposes to France and to Germany, let's form a continental bloc against the British. Let's line up Europe against the British. And unfortunately, it didn't work. It didn't work because the German emperor, Kaiser Wilhelm, Emperor William II, the Kaiser, was so stupid and was so much of an Anglophile and was so incapable of making strategic decisions that he did not accept this golden opportunity to really prevent World War I by having a continental bloc, Russia, Germany, France, of peaceful economic development and freeze the British out. And therefore, the shock that sent, the 1899, 1900, 1901 isolation of the British, is what then gave the impulse to Milner and Cecil Rhodes and people like this to come up with these round tables to begin a whole new strategy. And that's what then leads, with King Edward leading the charge, to the Triple Entente, the British-French Entente of 1903, and then the really big one is the British-Russian one of 1907-1908, which was considered impossible because the big conflict had been between Russia and the English. But Edward VII was able to paper over all this stuff, and then shortly after he died, that exploded into World War I. Yeah,
they went more into a covert roundtable. CFR is set up around that time in New York. It was pointed out then in the New York papers that weren't controlled by him that why is everything British, British, British? It was the affected style to speak in an Atlantic fake British accent.
Good question. And this is
that's the Thurston the How. I love you.
one of the puppets of Edward VII was Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt was a guy who had, had this identity crisis going, and he wanted to solve this by asserting that he was a member of the Anglo-Saxon master race. So Edward VII would write him letters saying, "Dear President Roosevelt, you and I are the leaders of the two branches of the Anglo-Saxon race. I represent the monarchical one and you represent the democratic one, but we have to work together." And Theodore Roosevelt would go gaga, right? He would say, "Oh my God, the king is treating me like an equal. I've got to do what he says," right? So this essentially the U.S.-British special relationship, if you like.
And this was sold by the Boer War propagandist, Winston Churchill, who then wrote these books that were pumped out, a whole bunch of volumes. I've read several of them, dealing with the history of the English peoples. And
English-speaking peoples, yes, the Anglo-Saxon master race. Now, Winston Churchill, where does he come in? Randolph Churchill is his father. He married this woman, Jenny Jerome. Jenny Jerome came from basically the New York banking community, dominated by August Belmont and others. So Randolph Churchill died of syphilis, like Prince Eddie, was quite common. The Churchill family, though, is the career of Randolph Churchill was sponsored by Edward VII.
That's Marlborough. Yeah.
And Sir Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, one of his first jobs was that he would write a letter to King Edward VII every day telling him what had gone on in Parliament that day. So he was also a protege. So the guys who bring you the catastrophes of the 20th century are, in many cases, proteges of Edward VII. But you were talking about Malthusianism. I think that's also worth talking about. The British East India Company has two guys that essentially define economics today. One is David Ricardo. He's the head of the British East India Company, practically, and he's the source of monetarism, right? Of Milton Friedman, Chicago School, stuff like this. However, they also have a training academy for their executives. It's called Haileybury, and here we have Malthus, Thomas Malthus. He copies things from Venetians. He copies from a guy called Ortes of Venice. But this whole idea that there are too many people, that science and technology can't make a difference.
And that's copied from Plato.
No. This is copied from Ortes. This is copied from Gian Maria Ortes.
No, but I'm saying Plato made some similar comments.
I don't see Plato really on that kind of a line at all. I would say Plato is on the.
Well, he had to duel. From what I've read, I mean, he did make comments about overpopulated and.
Look, a lot of Plato is by indirection. In other words, you can't take individual passages because a lot of times it's going to lead to a. In other words, it's some metaphorical statement.
Because he could be killed for what he was writing, so he did it.
No, there's also that sometimes he says things that turn out to be false later on in the same dialogue. But for sure, Malthus was the big ideologue of the British East India Company, and they ran genocide in India. In other words, you talk about genocide, they did it in India on a vast scale. So Malthus is this idea. World is overpopulated. Science and technology can do nothing. Progress is impossible. It'll always be the same, right? There's no way out of it. That leads to Darwin. That's essentially Darwin's worldview, which is scientifically false. Nietzsche and ultimately Hitler and the Nazis.
And the British royals love this because it said there's elite bloodlines, the world's overpopulated, we ought to spread diseases to kill off the poor. This is Malthus, 250 years ago. And so this goes along and then develops ideas like social Darwinism. We're killing people, doing them a favor. It grows into the eugenics with Galton. Right. And that's this entire stream of where we are today.
And again, Prince Philip. If Prince Philip says he wants to be reincarnated as a deadly virus to come back and kill people and help solve the problem of overpopulation, again, that statement goes beyond anything Hitler ever said.
And that is repeated by all these top professors like Pianka here at UT. This is their religion. I mean, you read their writings. To be entered into their club, to get the funding for publications, to be even allowed into the party, you have got to say humans are a parasite, and it's literally a control freak ultimate snobbery where they say, we're going to control history, we're going to set up a control grid, we're going to cut off resources, post-industrial world, we're going to then wipe everybody out. World government is a means to an end. This is a global, hidden Nazi movement.